Hello and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to show you 3 ways you can master the top grades. Number 1 is going to be looking at an essay written by a student. Number 2, I'm going to use the mark scheme, and then I'll show you how the whole mark scheme basically comes down to 7 key skills. If you can do these 7, you can get top grades 100% of the time. So the viewer who sent me this essay is Kanu-san, and he's looking at the role of violence in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the extract we're looking at is the killing of Carew, which is the beginning of chapter 4, the Carew murder case, which you can find for free online on Project Gutenberg. Kanu-san starts with a thesis. In the novel, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the role of violence is a recurring theme used by Stevenson to express the evil of Hyde and to grapple with the fears of his Christian readers, given the rapid growth of crime in Victorian England. So my examiner's comment, this is a 2-part thesis. One, that he's grappling with the fears of his Christian readers about the nature of evil, and the other, that he's following their fears of crime. As we go through the essay, you'll see I've highlighted the use of quotation in yellow. Where the text is bold, this is using subject terminology. It's not what you think. Subject terminology is just the vocabulary you need to write about any literature. And then the bold italics is where he uses context. And you'll notice that the context fits into his sentences just as his quotations do. So we've got embedded quotations and embedded context. Now, Kanu-san has taken my advice not to start with the extract. If you start with the extract, it's really difficult to write a coherent argument throughout your essay. So he starts elsewhere in the novel and will fit the extract in where it makes sense. Elsewhere in the novel, in chapter 1, Stevenson presents violence and brutality through the construct of evil, Mr. Hyde. So this is really important. Talking about characters as constructs is something that the examiners get very, very excited about because it proves they're not real people and the author is using them for a purpose. And if you know they're using them for a purpose, your essay will explain that purpose and get top grades. Hurrah! Stevenson shows Hyde to be the epitome of dark violence through Enfield's description as a damned juggernaut. This allusion depicts a wagon carrying a Hindu god which worshippers threw themselves under, being crushed to death. So we now have more subject-specific vocabulary, construct and allusion, words that you use about literature. We have another embedded quotation, and then we have quite a lot of context. It's only ever worth using context if it's going to help you make a point, and this is the point it helps Kanu-san make. Through his use of imagery, Stevenson presents Hyde's violence as barbaric. So barbaric links to the idea of an unchristian god and of figures being crushed to death. He's used the context well. This is emphasised through the further alienation of the Christian reader, as this reference to Hinduism is unnatural to Victorian society. So now you can see he's making a link between that and how unnatural Hyde is. Now, what normally happens is that the examiners find that the first paragraph, even in a top grade essay, is thoughtful consideration of the text, rather than a convincing critical analysis. And the reason for that is you need a lot of evidence to become convincing, and you haven't got that evidence right at the beginning of your essay. So over time, you'll get lots of thoughtful developed points, and that will then become convincing because there are so many of them. Now, our next paragraph looks like it doesn't have a quotation in, which would be a bad idea. However, I've just separated it this way. The paragraph we're going to look at is another interpretation of that same quotation. Conversely, Stevenson's use of this imagery could be a subtle attack on religion and God, which, being an atheist, he did not believe in. By likening Hyde, a supposed construct of pure evil, to the deity which sits upon the wagon, trampling those below it, Stevenson likens God to Mr. Hyde, a character created by a man, and thus challenges society's belief in Christianity. So this is a very thoughtful alternative interpretation. He signalled that it's an alternative interpretation with the connective conversely, and he's using tentative language. Could be. He's not saying for definite. However, his point would make a lot more sense if the God in the wagon was a Christian God. So equally, we could argue that it reinforces society's belief in Christianity because non-Christian gods are barbaric. So this isn't quite convincing, even though it's very thoughtful. But Kanu-san has given us this idea that Hyde isn't necessarily as evil as we think because he's godlike, and he's going to carry that idea through into this paragraph. Moreover, this undertone of Stevenson's message continues as Hyde trampled calmly over the girl's body. The juxtaposition of the adverb calmly to trampled displays Hyde's lack of empathy and stresses his evil aptitude for violence. However, notice how the connective introduces another layer, an alternative interpretation. His calmness could reflect a lack of pleasure in the pain that the girl feels. And this is supported through the pair running into each other naturally enough, with the event of supposed violence having a hyperbolic tone, and a more sophisticated reader being able to infer the incident to be an accidental collision. In other words, Kanu-san is suggesting that at the beginning of the novel, Hyde isn't actually evil in his actions, he's just portrayed as evil by other people's judgment of him. So dealing with these two interpretations in the same paragraph is a fine-grained analysis, and it's possibly convincing because it links back to the idea of Hyde not necessarily being totally evil because he's likened to a deity, to a god. In his next paragraph, Kanu-san is trying to develop the same argument. Similarly, in the extract, a hyperbolic tone is continued, and Hyde, despite his murder of Sir Danvers Carew, continues to be villainised by Victorian society. Now, this bit I've decided is not a convincing first sentence. We can't really argue that Hyde shouldn't be villainised by Victorian society because he's just committed a murder, which makes him the very worst kind of villain. What Kanu-san means is that the hyperbolic tone describing the murder is exaggerated and unrealistic, which will cause the reader to have an exaggerated reaction to Hyde. His actions are described gruesomely through the bones which were audibly shattered. Whilst this use of audible imagery creates a gothic undertone, it seems utterly unrealistic and continues the arguably undeserved evil portrayal of Hyde. Well, you can't really argue that Hyde isn't evil if you've just talked about him murdering Sir Danvers Carew. Now, Kanu-san is writing this essay after buying my guide to Jekyll and Hyde, in which I deal with the killing of Sir Danvers Carew, and there I put forward the idea that actually it isn't Hyde's motive to kill Sir Danvers Carew, it's actually Jekyll's motive, and Hyde kills Sir Danvers Carew for Dr. Jekyll. I'm not going to explain that now. You could buy the guide or watch the video I link at the end. Stevenson's use of this imagery mocks the Christian reader, as whilst they repress their darker desires, they unknowingly enjoy the violent descriptions of brutality. That's a very well made point at the end, where he's pointing out the hypocrisy of Victorian readers. So the rest is at least thoughtful and developed, though the first bit is not entirely convincing. Here, Kanu-san does become convincing by considering what this shows about society. Overall, Stevenson has two interpretations of violence: the dark and evil brutality of Hyde, which he perhaps employs to satisfy a Christian reader who would share definitive views of evil, and conversely, in a way that challenges the supposed evil behind Hyde's actions and presents the character as a product of Victorian society. Now, this is a brilliant idea, but he hasn't fully explained how it is that society, rather than Jekyll, has produced Hyde. So we've got a grade 9 idea there that isn't fully explained. So not yet fully convincing. So Kanasan started with the beginning of the text, then he fit the extract in chronologically where it happened, and now he's moving elsewhere in the novel, which is going to allow him to make a coherent argument throughout the essay. Simply following the text chronologically will always allow you to drop the extract in exactly where it fits. It's a really good technique. In the extract and elsewhere, the theme of violence is used to portray a negative view of science that satisfies the Christian reader, but a subtle undercurrent of science's importance over religion. So again, this is starting to be convincing. He's suggesting that Stevenson is giving the Christian reader what they want, an attack on science, but that we can also read the novel differently and show that the science is actually more important than Christian faith. So the novel is trying to subvert Christian belief. In the extract, Hyde broke out in a great flame of anger. The verb broke has connotations of damage, showing Hyde's violence. Furthermore, Stevenson's metaphorical great flame is symbolic of Hyde's red-hot violence, with the adjective great juxtaposing with Hyde's small stature, and expressing the sheer volume of anger he holds. So that's a brilliant analysis of how violence would appall the Christian reader. Now, in the next part of the paragraph, Kanasan is going to show how Stevenson is actually subverting that view and suggesting that science is superior to Christianity. However, one could view this quote differently by its reference to science. This creates a sense of disgust in the Victorian reader, both towards Hyde and the science which created him. Alternatively, a flame could, rather than destruction, be interpreted as a beacon of man's progress, being humanity's first innovation, and great has a double meaning of magnificence and wonderfulness. Thus, Stevenson implies his view that scientific progress is beneficial for humanity. So that's a brilliant alternative interpretation which will need more information to back it up. And that's what gives us his next paragraph. This is a brilliant way of backing it up. As such, he places Jekyll in the house of John Hunter, a now celebrated surgeon who made his discoveries on bodies dug up illegally by grave robbers. Stevenson makes the parallel to Jekyll's scientific discoveries, which, whilst immoral, can benefit humanity. Moreover, in the closing chapter of the novel, Stevenson implies that Hyde, a figure of extreme violence to a Christian reader, was created by mere chance. Despite what he has undergone, Jekyll wants his scientific work to continue. As if he had better intentions, he would have created an angel instead of a fiend. The use of these juxtaposing figures of religion is used to relate to the Christian audience and impose Stevenson's views upon them. Moreover, this use of juxtaposition also creates the idea that the events of the novel occur by chance and iterate science's ability to be used for good. So this is by far the best paragraph in the essay so far, because it uses the context so accurately to back up his alternative interpretation. Most students don't pick up on the idea that Hyde didn't need to be a fiend and could have been an angel, as long as his creator was in a different frame of mind when he created him. This paragraph is therefore fully convincing. Let's now look at the conclusion. In conclusion, on a simpler level, Stevenson uses the tool of violence to portray Hyde as purely evil and his existence as a heretical science in order to satisfy a Victorian reader. However, the deeper themes underlying his writing suggest his own views that there is no definitive concept of evil and that it exists within us all, and, having had tuberculosis through his life, that scientific discovery is far more important than religion, which he seems to challenge throughout the novel. This conclusion summarises what his argument has been, and I like the contrast between what he's calling the simpler Christian view and the deeper themes that he's revealed in his analysis. Now, if we shrink that down a little bit, you can look for the italics. Remember, that's the context, and you can see how context appears in virtually every paragraph. Not that one, but every other paragraph. We very rarely get long chunks of context, so they normally work as embedded quotations. But here in this paragraph, remember, the whole of that paragraph was writing about the significance of this context and links it explicitly to embedded quotations. Now you should also notice in my examiner's commentary, it's not convincing all the way through. So we go to the mark scheme and try to work out, is he at the top of the level or at the bottom of the level, because it's not totally convincing. Well, at the top of the level, you have to be convincing in exploring one or more ideas. So we could argue that that top paragraph about the John Hunter house does make it convincing about one idea. Or we could go down to the bottom of the level where the candidate is starting to demonstrate elements of exploratory thought. Well, I think there's a lot more than just starting to explore. So we have to give a mark above 26 and possibly 27. I'm going to give it 28. Here are my summary comments for you to read through if you want to learn more about the essay. In yellow, I've highlighted for me what is the next obstacle. He's only written about 7 quotations, which for me is not enough for a range of evidence. So Kanu-san would need more quotations in order to get 100%. And I've already highlighted for you where he needs to be more convincing in arguing his interpretations. Let's now take a look at those 7 essential skills of essay writing. You want a thesis which has about 3 ideas in it. Kanu-san only had 2. Each paragraph has to refer back to the ideas in the thesis. Well, Kanu-san's main idea was that Hyde was used to grapple with the fears of Christian readers, and we can see that Christian readers appears in nearly every paragraph, as does their fear. You could see that quotations were embedded all the way through. That means they fit into the sentence and made sense within the sentence. And he used that idea of the characters being a construct. You'll have noticed that every paragraph talked about Stevenson and therefore his point of view. You can also see that in his plan he has written about the whole text. Writing chronologically allowed him to do that. Now in number 7 he has a very good conclusion, but I would find 100% conclusion would consider how we interpret the theme or the character at the ending of the novel. So Kanu-san might have done that here by linking Hyde's death to the inevitable death of Jekyll, which would prove his point that evil exists in all of us. And to find out why Jekyll is more evil than Hyde, you could buy my guide, or check out the video appearing here. Nice rhymes, Mr. Salles. You've still got it. Don't know what you've got.